Legislature's back in order. I believe when we broke, we were with Senator Ada. Senator Ada?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So where we left off at the last discussion on Bill 154 was an amendment that was proffered by Senator San Augustine regarding the issue of the table on page 9 regarding the minimum, the setbacks and intervals. So I think it's not straightforward, and so it probably merits a little bit of discussion. So what has been passed around to everyone is an aerial photograph, and this here is the ITC intersection. And in that aerial photograph, to orientate us, we have to the bottom left is the ITC building. Across from it is FHP. And then, of course, there's to the straight up north is the Personal Finance Center building. So what this diagram shows is the question of, first on the bill in page 9, there's a table there, and it says at the top, minimum distance and minimum distance from intersection. And so the question was raised, well, how do you measure that distance, and where do you measure it from regarding the intersection? So it was actually verified by one of the sign companies, and basically the guidelines that they use from DPW is that for the minimum distance from an intersection, you measure it from the closest corner to where the sign is going to be put up. So in this particular example, the sign, so that building just below the Personal Finance Center is that building where the Port of Mocha is, and right close to the street is the digital sign that's there right now. So that sign was erected at that spot because it had to comply with 100 feet from the intersection, as you can see from the line. And then on page 10, line 12 there regarding setbacks, then there's a minimum setback of distances of 10 feet from the edge of the property line. And from the edge of the property line is important as opposed to from the edge of the road, because although you may go out to the edge of the road, you don't know how wide the public easement would be, and that may vary in spots. So that explains then the minimum distance that is being required by the bill from the intersection. Now, the amendment that was being proffered is that the additional 10 feet from the edge of road for digital signs and 8 feet from the edge of road for static signs. So I think that maybe that is unnecessary, because from the 10 foot and the 8 foot setback are actually covered already on page 10, subparagraph 4 regarding setbacks. And so what that box really should read should be just minimum distance from intersection is 100 feet, period. Then the other part of the amendment was to eliminate the 3,500 feet interval between signs. And that one, certainly I would have great concerns if we were to eliminate that, because certainly that's going to invite clutter, and I don't think we want that. And so I also passed out yesterday some aerial graphs which shows, I think it was 4 aerial graphs that I had shown, and it showed the diameter, the circle around you know, if you put a sign up at Docomo, how far is 3,500 feet? 3,500 feet is just from the Docomo building. 3,500 feet is right up there by where ITC is. So the way it's written is that that's it. You're not going to see any more of these off-premise signs between the ITC and the Docomo building. Now, it has nothing to do with the on-premise signs. So certainly something like Rexall can erect a sign out there at the edge of its property line, advertising, you know, the goods and services that is being sold at the Rexall building on that property. And that's the difference between the two. The one up at ITC advertises products and services that is found elsewhere, not on that particular property. So I would ask my colleagues to consider that, you know, we really don't need the amendments, but we do need to amend and remove the word after 100 feet, the words from edge of road, because it's really the minimum distance from the intersection is 100 feet. Thank you.
All right, so it was actually Senator Snogstein's amendment, and I'm not sure are you amending his amendment, or you're just speaking about his amendment and hoping that somebody amends?
Yeah, so I was speaking about his amendment.
Mr. Speaker, withdraw my amendment. I spoke to Senator Tom earlier.
All right, so Senator Snogstein has withdrawn his amendment, and in its place is the ADA amendment to read 100 feet from the intersection.
Well, actually, it should just read 100 feet because the title of the table is minimum distance. And then for that one column, minimum distance from intersection is 100 feet. Minimum distance between signs is 3,500 feet. And we already amended that 3,000, that we dropped the extra 0. We already amended that.
Okay.
Right? Yes. Okay. So that's the amendment that I'm proffering now, is just to remove the words from edge of road.
All right, on the ADA amendment on page 12 to remove from edge of road and just read 100. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard? We're on page 12. On the bill as distributed on page, I'm not page 12, page 9, line 12, between line 12 and 13, page 9. The column reads from intersection, and so the ADA amendment is to remove the from edge of road after 100 feet, so it's just going to read 100 feet in that column, which would be from intersection. And between signs, just drop the 10 at the end to make it 3,500 feet, as opposed to 3,000. 35,000. Rather than 3 zeros, it will only have 1 0. 2 zeros. So we drop 1 0 and we drop from the edge of road. Any senator wish to be heard on those two amendments? Senator Estevez.
Mr. Speaker, you said on 2 amendments?
Well, all right, let's take them one by one. On the one amendment to drop from edge of road, any objection? You object to from edge of road? Okay. Do you want to get on the mic? The column is entitled from intersection. So the number under it should be 100 feet from intersection. Not 100 feet from intersection from 100 feet from road. All right, there's an objection. Do you want to state what the objection is, besides just an... No, I'm not asking you to withdraw it. I'm just asking you to please state so we understand, so that we can vote on the whether or not we support the objection or we're going to support the amendment. All right. All those in favor of the amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. The second one under the column between signs. Oh, that was the First Amendment. It was already taken care of. I'm sorry. All right. Any other amendments? Any other on the main motion? Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In reviewing the bill, a bit unfortunate. I did support the previous amendment before withdrawal on adjusting the distances between signs. And while I appreciate the graphics the author had provided to us, or I do have issues within statute, and what we're doing is creating pretty much a protectionist law. I mean, if you look at the radius, I mean, pretty much these three companies control the market. I think this body has been favorable in granting them an excusal at one point because of issues with the Land Use Commission. But I believe that 3,500 feet is a bit unreasonable if we expect competition. I think we're moving forward, Mr. Speaker, basing this on the assumption that every single sign put out there is going to be maxed. And that's not necessarily the case. And so I don't think that it's going to be Sign City and we're going to see max signs out there, but to take away the ability for the market to thrive, for it to be competitive, I think is a disservice. While I don't believe there should be no limitation, I do think we should be able to compromise on something lower than 3,500 because the graphics clearly illustrate it. I do understand that there is a clause that allows for variances with the Guam Land Use Commission, but let me be frank, Mr. Speaker. I think there are concerns with the public that at that point, then it's going to depend on who you know and who can get your variance through, as opposed to the position of this body, whether or not we want to support a competitive market in this advertisement space. And so my reading of the law and understanding that not every single advertising sign is going to meet the maximum dimensions allowed under the law, and also considering that besides the fact that there is going to be a distance between the signs, there are other regulatory requirements that they have to make up. You can't just put a sign anywhere. There's other agencies and entities that are going to have input into it. And so while maybe it doesn't look like, it looks fine where we have two signs, if you look at it from a business perspective and allowing the market to thrive, from a regulatory point of view, more than likely you might see one more sign. And I'll tell you what, those companies that we gave a buy to on the previous sign law already have a leg up. I'm not against that, Mr. Speaker, but I'm for a fair marketplace. I support a fair marketplace. So considering all of the other regulatory requirements that these companies have to invest into and support, considering that not every sign is going to be or has to be. I mean, if we wanted to look at limitations on how many maximum signs I'd look at that if we wanted to. But to just say, hey, if you didn't get a sign in prior to the passage of this bill to be grandfathered, and you can't make it within the range, you know, hey, sorry, Guam's so small, go put your sign down in Molesto. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make an amendment. And I'd like to amend, it would be the box between lines 12 and 13 on page 9, that the minimum distance between sign be amended to 500 feet. And that's with the understanding that they still have to go through the regulatory process. That is further going to restrict where these signs could go. But I believe it's a reasonable amount to allow for fair competition in the marketplace and not provide a legal monopoly to businesses that were first in the chute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There's an amendment to proffered on page 9 to amend the 3,500 to read 500. Anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Lee, then Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not standing here in support or in opposition to the proposed amendment because I agree with the previous speaker in the general concept. Why are we regulating distances between signs? If we have a property owner adjacent to the main highway that only has 100-foot length adjacent to the highway, and then we have businesses on both sides, and they put up signs, and that individual property owner wants to erect a sign that is still visible and is able to advertise, why would we restrict it? So it goes back to the concept that the previous speaker had shared with us, and my understanding, Mr. Speaker, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the second thought that the mover of the amendment has proffered or has shared is that with the proviso that the regulatory agencies still have to approve these signs. The DPW would be the entity responsible for providing the permit. But in terms of overseeing the whole process, they would be processing the permit consistent with these provisions for signs that are going to be outlined here should this legislation be passed into law. So I don't know what regulatory restriction or oversight DPW would have other than following the law, rather than every single application being reviewed, similar to the process that is in place at the moment, albeit I had some concerns about some of the individuals sitting in that panel, but at least allowing for that overview so that if anyone wants to erect a sign, they would have to go through a public notification, ensuring that the residents within that adjacent area are aware of any signage that is going to be erected that exceeds the regulatory or the regular allowances. That's what this comes out to, because we're talking about additional opportunity in terms of the sizes of these signs. With that, then I personally feel that we need to ensure that the community is aware of what is going to be erected adjacent to their properties, and they understand exactly what kind of sign is going to be placed there by going through the regulatory process of public notification, ensuring that the Mayor's Council and the Municipal Planning Council have an opportunity to review their applications individually that are in excess of a specific signage requirement, which is, I believe, today's signage requirement is fine. It's just all about ensuring that the community is actively involved. So I'm neither in support of the amendment or in opposition of the amendment, Mr. Speaker, because I believe that we should not be restricting property owners from erecting signs as long as they are in compliance with any rules, regulations, and laws. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee, did you wish to be heard?
Suzus Masi, Mr. Speaker. I just have a few questions if the mover of the amendment would so yield. With regard to changing on page 9 between lines 12 and 13, the minimum distance between signs from 3,500 feet to 500 feet. Let's take, for example, the Tumon area. Do you know how many signs that span of that stretch of roadway in San Victorious would allow if we moved it from 3,500 to 500?
It's my understanding that if it's past that 3,500, they'd probably be able to fit a total of maybe 3 max signs within Tumon alone.
7?
And so at 500 feet, they would be able to, you could potentially have more signs down there.
So how many would that be, like 40?
It really would depend. It really would depend, because as I stated before, there are other regulatory requirements. It's not as simple as, oh, there's 500 feet, put a sign. There's 500 feet, put another sign. There's a bit more to it. And so it can vary between 500 feet or more, depending on where they're going to be able to meet the requirements to be able to place that sign legally and to where it's conforming. And so if we increase the distances between the signs, that further limits the ability for the market to adjust and find a suitable location that's conforming. And that's the basis of the amendment. I couldn't tell you exactly how many signs we'd be able to fit at 500 feet. We'd have to go out there and look at every other regulation guiding signage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just doing the math, given the 3,500 foot number, it's my understanding that would be anywhere from 6 to 7 signs along that stretch of roadway in Tumon alone. And so I guess my main concern is just that there's so much going on down there already. That is the one part of our island where we have a lot of foot traffic. We have a lot of local families that are walking down there in the morning and the later evening hours. We also have a lot of tourists that are on foot. There is a decreased speed limit in that area, but not everyone abides by that. And so my major concern here is safety. If we have all of these signs kind of obstructing the roadway, making it more dangerous for people because it just gives an increased opportunity for more distracted driving. Many times when I'm traveling in Tumon, I see families, a lot of tourist families are walking down the street with their kids. And, you know, little 4 or 5-year-old kid lets go of mom and dad's hand and darts towards the roadway. It's just a nightmare waiting to happen. And we need to make sure that our motorists are focused on the road, that they are seeing, you know, especially even today with weather conditions, we want to give our drivers and our pedestrians every opportunity to be safe on our roadways. And I think decreasing this number and allowing for more signs will just increase the opportunity for distracted driving. And so again, my concern is safety. And so, yeah, I object to changing the distance between signs just for safety reasons. I mean, if you can't even, we won't even be able to tell how many signs potentially could be placed if we only have a 500-foot threshold. That's just a lot of signage in addition to on-premise signage that's already allowed. So every restaurant, every bar that's already in Tumon is allowed to have on-premise signage. And in addition to that, we're allowing 500 feet in between off-premise signs, and that could be digital, that could be static. It's a lot, and we don't want to clutter it. We want to give our local community and our tourists an opportunity to enjoy the scenery. That's why many people come to visit Guam. And so in addition to safety, I think there's a little bit of an economic concern as well. And so for those reasons, I object to Just Mossy.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the Estevez amendment? There's now been an objection. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Castro, then Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I'm not necessarily in support of the 500-foot amendment, I just want to state for the record that I too stand in objection of a requirement to regulate by distance. I know most of the concerns hover around, let's say, Tumon. But I don't think, first of all, number one, people have even asked the Municipal Planning Council of Tumon what their opinion is on the matter. But more to my point, what about folks who reside in less urban areas? What about the suburban areas? What about the rural areas? What about areas that, you know, have only enough space for a few signs that can go up? And just for the record, this is not just, at least in my understanding of the bill, this is not just for digital signs, this is for static signs. And while I was passionately in support of preserving those businesses that, in my opinion, were under attack from outside forces in terms of being strongly encouraged to shut down because they fell within this certain window of the law or the law was antiquated to address their needs, in my opinion, I'm in agreement with the previous speaker that to suppress the free market by governing how far the next sign could be, I think that's an unfair advantage to anybody. And I do agree that we have to be mindful as a community in terms of the amount of signs. I think the senator who authored this bill, I commend him for the amount of work they put in. But you know, nothing's really come out in terms of the luminosity or population density or other considerations with respect to, you know, what the kind of light noise might be in a particular area. So Tumon, the people of Tumon, the governing structures of Tumon, they may have a very different perspective on what kinds of signs they may want in their municipality. I just warn against over-regulating what it is that the private sector or the free market should be able to do for itself. And that's my opinion on the matter, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Vice Speaker, you're recognized. Any other speaker after the Vice Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment, I think the amendment highlights some of the issues that I have with this bill. It highlights that, yes, the 3,500 feet restricts and pretty much is going to very much favor those who have signs, and those who have these electronic signs at this point were the ones that were granted special consideration by this legislature a few months ago. And everyone else who wants to put up a sign within 3,500 feet is going to be prohibited. It doesn't sound fair. The other thing I think that his amendment highlights is that, so should it be 3,500 or 500? Well, you know, how do we know? What is it that we're actually considering here? What are we valuing? Are we valuing space between signs? Is that really the factor that makes it safer, more beautiful, less ugly, less dangerous, more conducive for our community? I mean, I'm not really seeing the correlation, and it almost seems random. I mean, we're always going to be stuck between, do we allow signs in general, everyone, a free-for-all? It's pretty much, you know, what we're on the verge of here. Do we allow signs? Do we allow any kind of signs on all of these types of property? And if we are going to allow it, do we allow it for everyone? I mean, are we going? It just seems that of all the restrictions to make, it's because my neighbor put up his sign first. Now I can't put up a sign on my property. It just seems the least fair of all the restrictions. I'm not sure how the Guam Land Use Commission would have dealt with that, but I think, you know, they would have considered the rest of the area. I mean, the intent of this bill says that it's going to, you know, allow signs with it says it would ensure that off-premise signs, digital or static, do not distract drivers and endanger public safety on Guam's roads. The aesthetics of the community environment are protected, and that off-premise signs are placed and operated in a manner that does not harm the surrounding property values. I don't see how this provision of this bill, or even the amendment in its attempt, is addressing any of those. It almost seems random. And I think it also highlights not just my objection to this bill, but the objection that was raised at the public hearing by even people in the industry. Those companies said that they prefer the method that is already in place, that if signs are going to be put up that are not authorized under the current zones, or by making an exception to put up these types of signs, that be done through a very open process, a process that allows for community input, especially puts emphasis on the consent of the municipality where the signs are going to be put up, the Municipal Planning Council, that would require input of all of the regulatory agencies in the review process, and that allows the public to listen to the rationale of the developers and how this is going to benefit their community. And I just wanted to raise those. I think the intent of the amendment is correct, that 3,500 makes it very unfair for all the adjacent property owners. And that seems random to me. Yet 500 seems equally random because, you know, we've got 100 by 100 lots. So I just think we have to be driven by a policy that is based on something. Is it safety? So what is the safest distance? And let's get some facts in here to base our decision on. Is it, you know, clutter? Because there was testimony at the hearing regarding clutter, and so, you know, or I mean, maybe that's what this is really boiling down to, really just a very subjective guess by each one of us as to what looks like clutter to us, what looks safe to us, what's distracting to us, you know? Can I put it on my 100 by 100 foot lot, or I don't know. So anyways, those are just some of my concerns, and I think this amendment very much highlights that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Estevez amendment? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too share some of the concerns that my colleagues have shared, just like the previous speaker. To have a number here of 3,500 but not know exactly why, how we got to that number, just doesn't make sense to me. I know the 500 seems more acceptable because then you kind of make it fair. What if a property owner 500 feet from an existing sign now it has the wherewithal to be able to do that, wants to do it, but they can't do it because this body said you have to be 3,500 feet away from an existing sign. It just kind of doesn't make sense. It doesn't sit well in my mind. The reason why I like the 500 is because then you open it up. But is 500 the number? I don't know. Is there, I'm sure there's some guide somewhere, and maybe that's where I want to ask the author of the bill, Bill 154, if there is some sort of model or guide in terms of how or what we can reference. I'm sure that these types of things are perhaps listed in some sort of guideline. So would the author yield if there's some sort of guideline that was used or we could reference?
Senator Addy, do you wish to yield?
To the question that's being asked, the only really formula, objective measure that's used in the industry is with respect to the size. And that's correlated to the speed, the legal speed in that area, and the width of the road. So there's a formula that's actually used to determine the size. Insofar as the interval between signs, I will admit that's an arbitrary number, and so probably the best way to answer the question is picture in your mind that if we were to reduce it to, let's say, 500 feet, so then the number of digital signs, digital or static signs that you will see between the Docomo building and the ITC intersection will be 8 signs from end to end. Now, if that doesn't in your mind appear to be clutter, then maybe we should then lower the intervals. Take down at Tumon, right now we have a sign in front of the VIP restaurant on Chalan San Vitores. 3,500 feet, if you go north, would be just about where the Westin Hotel is, where you turn up to go towards Route 1. That's 3,500 feet. So if you were to go 500 feet between signs, you will have 8 signs on that stretch of road. If that in your mind appears to be clutter, then maybe 500 feet is too close. So I think, granted, it's subjective insofar as, you know, what you would consider to be clutter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I'm getting some messages that there is this International Municipal Lawyers Association that has some sort of guidance on how these things are done, and perhaps there's a lot of concerns that are being raised, and the Vice Speaker, I think, said it right. Are we doing this to address how beautiful we want or how ugly we want our roadways to be, or want to be fair to those who want to put up these signs? You know, what is that? What are we trying to do? Perhaps this is one of those bills that require more work. And you know, I would suggest, I won't move, but if that can be considered, this is something that goes back to committee and is worked on a little bit further.
Vice Speaker.
On that motion, Mr. Speaker, I would support that.
He didn't make a motion, but if you wish to. All right, let's take a very short recess. If you want to try to find the international lawyer, whatever, and we'll take a short recess, 15 minutes.
We're back in session. Speaker Cruz, you're recognized on the Estevez amendment.
Madam Speaker, I could do it from there, but from here, I'd like to make a motion that this bill be sent back to committee. There are some things that have to be addressed. I understand that there's been some question as to constitutionality. There is some issue as to some international lawyers' guide on how to be able to do signs. I think the best way to do it is to just send this bill back to committee. And they can figure it out from there and find whatever, if there's a model somewhere on what the distance is that it should be. But right now, everybody's just guessing and trying to figure out what it's going to look like.
On the motion, Senator Adder, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm not going to object to that. I will send it back to committee and it will die in committee. And until somebody introduces a bill that would legalize off-premise signs, then that's when we can begin the discussion again. So I will take it back. I have no objection to that. I would move that we bring it back to committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Adder. Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Well, Madam Speaker, in light of those sentiments, it's just ironic that what's prompting this is an amendment to reduce the distance between signs from 3,500 down to 500 in the interest of including more, only now for us to, at this point, be in a situation where we're going to be excluding all. So I think that we should really consider what's happening and come to terms with it. I mean, if we're going to need to take some more time to figure out a distance that is going to be satisfactory to everybody, then let's do that. But if we're going to just kill it all and deprive everybody, then how are we helping the community? And I think that's the whole intent of the original iteration of this bill. And I'd like to thank the author for introducing it. I'm a fan of electronic signs. I think that it provides for a professional basis from which we can advertise, and it opens it up to the free market. So I'm kind of concerned of the idea that we're going to just close up the entire industry altogether. I think that we should be encouraging development. We should be encouraging people to be able to get into business and generate revenue. So if the first step in doing that is entertaining this bill and having a 3,500-foot distance, then let's do that, and let's do what we normally do with legislation. If it requires a change in the future, then let's amend it. But if we're willing to move forward other measures that need to be considered and say that we can just amend them in the future, this is definitely something that we can amend in the future, but let's not get wrapped around the axle so much that we're killing off people's opportunities. I mean, that's the last thing we should be doing, especially when we're trying to grow our tax base and improve revenue coming into our government. Let's open it up and let's do what we can to encourage as much growing of the tax base as possible. So if no one's going to object to the motion, and if the motion will not be withdrawn, I will object to the motion, and let's get this done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There's been an objection to the motion. On the motion to refer back to the committee, Senator Estevez, I made the mistake. It's not supposed to be a debatable motion. That was my error. I apologize. On the motion to refer back to committee, all in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes. Thank you.
I believe that completes the second reading file. We have a couple of bills that need to be engrossed. Can we do it Thursday morning? I want to make sure that all the gross and everything else, negligence and ands and ors are taken out properly. Let's 10 o'clock on Thursday morning.